That's what my husband always says too. He's like, another murder book? Yeah. You're good to start whenever. Don't feel like I'm holding you up because I could just put this down, but all good. Amazing. I'm pretty sure it's
try to keep it casual enough, like we have refreshments. I'll encourage people to help themselves stirring, or so.
Love it. Yeah, they can do whatever they want.
All right. Okay. Hello. Hi. Nice to see you all. Welcome to Lunch and Learn. I'm Jennifer Vanette, Outreach Coordinator here at the Castle Museum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today. I still have questions about why you all turn out whenever there's murder, but it's fine. It's fine. There are some light refreshments. I believe we have some cookies today, some water, coffee. If you want that at any point, feel free to help yourself. If you need a restroom, there is one just outside that back door there. So if you just make your way, that would be best for everyone. Also, if you have your cell phone, if you silence your phone, that'd be great. Helps us out during the presentation. Well, it will help Allie out. I will sit in the back and I'll be fine, but I was going to say, she just glared at me. Okay, moving on. I like to do a couple housekeeping announcements so that you know what's coming up. Our next History After Hours, so our evening time lecture series that takes place on third Thursdays. So the next one will be September 18th at 5:30, and we will have more murder. This will be Unsolved Saginaw, the murder of Saginaw Doe. So Catherine has been, we basically have, has anybody seen or read Thursday Murder Club? We basically have that going on in our staff. So Catherine's has been doing some research. So that will be interesting. So that's History After Hours. And then the next Lunch and Learn, our fourth Tuesday of the month, September 23rd, we will have Anne-Marie Batowski-Sullivan, who is Director of Positive Results Downtown, and she's going to talk a bit about, it's their 50th anniversary year, and we also do have an exhibit on display for them, and that was up through the end of the month, so do be sure to check that out, but hopefully you'll come back and hear Anne-Marie talk about that. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Allie Siebert, who is from the Fenton area, where she's a researcher, historian, and author. I believe you're also involved in some historic preservation work too, yes?
Yes, so, kind of, yeah.
Busy woman. So yeah, I'm gonna let you take it from here. I don't want to steal too much thunder, but I've dug through what all she writes about and works on, and it's really fascinating. So thank you for being here, Allie.
Oh my gosh, thanks for having me. Hey guys, how's it going? Can you hear me okay? Good? Okay, amazing. Hi, I'm Allie. I'm super excited to be here. I didn't know what to expect. I've never been here before, but what an absolutely gorgeous building and gorgeous faces that I get to look at. So thanks for coming. Today, I am going to talk about the murder of Beatrice Epler from Alma, Michigan in 1917. But before we do that, I want to take a moment and kind of introduce myself and tell you what I'm all about. That's me. There's all my stuff. So, like she said, I am a historian, author, researcher, all that jazz. I started as a teacher. I went to school for elementary education, and I taught second grade, fifth grade, first grade, sixth grade. I did intervention. I did a Dean of Students thing, and I loved it, loved it, loved it. It was great. But we moved to Fenton in 2020. And I don't know how many of you guys have been to Fenton. Are we familiar with the area, kind of? It's cute, right? It's a cute little place. I love it there. But we moved to Fenton. We bought a house on Main Street. It's an old Victorian home. And I'd never lived in an old house before. I'd lived in, it was kind of like a new build. I spent, 25 years of my life growing up in the same house, but it wasn't old, it was new. My mom taught history. She's always loved history. I've never been a big fan of history. I was always like, keep it away from me. We spent all of our vacations at cemeteries. Like, that was the kind of vibe. So, like, it was not for me. And I was like, I'll never do that. But I also said I'd never be a teacher. And then I ended up there. But anyway, so we bought this old house on Main Street. And I was still teaching at the time. But I became completely obsessed with learning about the people who used to live in my home. I knew it was old, but I didn't know how old. The Zillow listing said 1900, which was not super specific, because that's what they list, everything that they don't know how old they are. So I made it my mission to find out everything I could about the history of this house that we just purchased. And I went to the Historical Society. They'd been closed because it was COVID. So I beat down their door long enough before they finally decided to let me in because I was that annoying. And they were allowing me to do research, and I asked them, I said, do you have any history on my house? And I gave them the address. And they said, well, it's an old house probably, but it's not historic. And I said, what does that mean? And they said, well, nobody famous lived there. It didn't really contribute anything to the community, so it's not historic. We don't have any information on it because it's not historic. And if nothing else, I am petty. So I said, I'm going to prove you wrong, and I'm going to research the history of this house and find out all the reasons why it is historic, even if nobody famous or crazy lived there. So I was teaching during the day. In the evenings, I was digging through census records. I was going to the deed office. I was learning how to use Ancestry. I was going through any old newspaper I could find and researching the entire history of my house. Turns out it's built in 1862, which is old, and that's a Civil War build, which is fairly rare. And I came across all of the people who'd ever lived in that house. I have hung their pictures on my wall. I visit them in the cemetery. I learned about Octavius Robinson, who owned a resort down at the lake, and it was the only wet resort in an otherwise dry area. So, they had a good time over there. I learned about the Horrells who lived there, and in 1888, their horse got loose and ran down Main Street, causing chaos. And no, these stories are not stories of mayors or governors or presidents or murderers or anything crazy, but they're people's stories, they're people's lives. People lived in my house, they died in my house, they celebrated, they mourned, they went to work, they came home and ate dinner. And those kinds of stories, whether or not they're crazy, sensationalized, anything, they're still important. And I realized as I was researching this that I felt so close to my house and so connected to my house, way more than I ever felt to the house that I grew up in, even though I spent the majority of my life there. Because I knew these stories and because I had researched these people and taken all of these little pieces of their lives and put them together, I felt so connected to the place that I was living in. And I said, if my house that isn't historic has all of these stories and all of this life that has been in it, I'll bet every house on the block does, I bet every house in Fenton does, I bet every house in, et cetera, et cetera. So I told my husband, I said, I'm quitting my job and I'm going to do this full time. So I said, give me a name for this business. He said, household history. I said, perfect. And I have to credit him, otherwise he gets annoyed because it is something that he has contributed to this. He's very proud of the name, okay? And so I started Household History. I advertised myself as someone who you can contact to research the history of your home, building, structure, whatever it may be. And when I'm done, you get the full rundown of everything about your house, building, structure, whatever it may be, in a hardcover book all the way from the beginning when it was built, who built it, every family that's ever lived there, their stories, where they ended up after, all that jazz, all the way to the present. and it's super, super fun. And I've loved doing it. I also do little mini ones, which is cool. I love it, love it, love it, but I decided I wasn't weird enough doing that, so I decided to add in murder. And now I do historical true crime as well. So these are all mine. Some are house histories, others are historical sort of weird stories, and others are historical true crime. Bloodstained is my newest one. I'm so, 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 so proud of it. I'm so excited to get to share it with you guys. It is 5 stories of Michigan murders that have been forgotten by time. Ooh, everybody go, ooh. It ranges from 1879 to 1931. Flint, Alma, Hadley, Kalamazoo, and Grand Rapids. I always forget Grand Rapids. I don't know why. Grand Rapids. And they're just kind of wild stories that were once front page national news, and now nobody has any idea about them. Today, we're going to dive into one of those stories. And this is the story of Beatrice Epler. Now, before I can tell this story, I have to send you back in time. We are going back in time today to Alma, Michigan, in about 1916. Alma, Michigan, at this point in time, the population, how many of you guys are familiar with Alma? Yes? Oh my God, amazing. How many of you guys have heard the story of Beatrice Epler? See, that's what I'm talking about. Isn't that crazy? All right, you're going to wow somebody at the next dinner party you go to. In 1917, the population at Alma was about 6,000 people. So it was bustling. The industry there was growing rapidly. By 1918, the Republic Motor Truck Company was producing 1 out of every 9 trucks in the United States. Hold on 1 second. I have to figure out how this works because I don't have a thing. 1 second, 1 second. How does this work? Sorry, I have notes, but it's only like doing this. Oh, it's because I'm over here. 1 second. Hold on. I'm going to learn how to use technology just live. How do I get to where I need to go? I'm still here. No, I'm here. 1 second. I've arrived. Okay, great. Thank you for bearing with me. Great. Republic Motor Truck Company was producing 1 out of every 9 trucks in the United States, so it was really cruising. Alma College was founded in 1886, so we've got students coming in. It was essentially an area that had a relatively low crime rate. It was fairly safe in Alma. This time of the year, or this time period, the U.S. had declared war on Germany. We'd entered World War I. Women's suffrage was going on. The 18th Amendment prohibiting alcohol was approved by Congress. So there's a lot of stuff happening. The world is moving really, really fast. And in the middle of all that, we have the Epler family. There we are. Beatrice Epler here is the star of our show today. She was born in 1900 to Sam and Effie Epler. There's Effie here, her husband Sam, their son Floyd. This is about 1890. They lived in Alma on a farmhouse, a little bit of land on Grover Avenue, so just outside of town, but fairly close. It was a dirt road, a lot of farms out there. Now, Sam and Effie had had quite a bit of tragedy in their lives by the time this happened. They were married in 1885. They had a son who was born in 1886, Floyd. He died in 1903 from a fever. She had another child, Frankie, who was born in 1888 and died that same year. Another child, Jenny, who was born in 1890 and died that same year. A daughter, Pearl, you see Pearl there. Pearl was born in 1893, and she got married, had a child, and died in 1912 after having that child. They had a son, Thomas, who was born and died in 1896. They had Beatrice, who was born in 1900, and then they had Lloyd, who was born in 1905. At this point in 1917, in the house, we have Sam and Effie, Beatrice and Lloyd, the two children, and then Pearl's baby son. His mother had passed several years before that. Now, Beatrice Epler, here, is a very interesting character. And I'm going to preface, before I go any further, by saying that everything that I have as far as the information comes from testimonies from the case, comes from newspaper articles, comes from quotes, direct quotes from the people at the time. A lot of this is hearsay, but this is the information we have. In 1917, Beatrice was 16 years old. Now, with all of this tragedy that had happened to the Eplers, Beatrice had been the one to sort of shoulder a lot of it. She dropped out of school when she was young and went to work in a millinery shop to make money for the family. She was helping her mother and father constantly, whether it was at the farm or working in town or with the baby. But interestingly, she was known for being very stylish. Beatrice was so stylish that the shops downtown would loan her their clothes, their new clothes that they just got in or just made. They would give them to her for free. In return, they expect her to walk around town wearing them, like an advertisement. She was essentially like a 1900s influencer. And she was very proud of this. She was also a wizard with the needle and thread. She was so good at sewing and dressmaking. So good, in fact, that she was going to be leaving the next year for a job in Grand Rapids, which is a pretty big deal for a young girl to get a job at that point in time. She was known throughout Elma. People knew who she was. She's walking around town all the time in her stylish little clothes. She was so well known, however, that came with a little bit of stigma. Now, in this point in time in history, women are not expected to be standing on their own 2 feet. A lot of like the seen, not heard sort of mentality. A woman, a young woman especially, who feels empowered enough to use her physique to advance her career, that's not seen as a good thing. The boys in town would chastise her. Nobody wanted to be seen with Beatrice. She didn't have very many friends. She was known throughout town by a nickname, Six-Cylinder Liz. Which essentially means, from everything that I can put together, that she was a woman who moved too fast in every sense of the word. It was implying that she moved through men quickly, that she was climbing the ladder of whatever you want it to be too quickly, that she was confident in herself and in her body, and people didn't necessarily like that. However, there is another side to Beatrice. According to her mother, she was extremely quiet, extremely lonely. She carried a lot on her shoulders. Despite being 16 years old, her mother claimed that Beatrice would never go up the stairs to the second story of the house without her mother holding her hand because she was afraid of the dark. So we have this dichotomy for Beatrice Epler of a strong, independent young woman and a little girl. And at 16, that's kind of the place you're at. You're not quite a woman, but you're not a little girl anymore. And that was, I think, not again, okay, good. Part of the fascination with her. That brings us to September 4th, 1917. On the screen, you can see a map of downtown Alma. This was, I think it's 1918 when this map was from, so it's pretty close to when we're talking about. I'm going to tell you what we know about the last day that Beatrice was seen alive. It was September 4th, 1917. At 4 p.m., Beatrice puts on her coat. She's got this beautiful ruby red coat. She pins her hat to her head. She tells her mom, I'm going out to get sewing supplies. I've got a dress I've got to finish. I'm going to go downtown to the millinery shop and pick up a few things. Her mother says, of course. I'll see you later. Beatrice goes downtown all the time. It's not anything new. Her dad is out in the garden. As she's walking out the door, her dad calls to her. Says, Beatrice, I've got a letter down at the grocery store. At this point, they weren't delivering mail. You had to pick up your mail. Can you pick it up for me? She, of course, says, of course. It's a normal errand, not anything new. She waves to her family, and she heads up Grover Avenue. And I have a map here somewhere. Where did I put it? Here. Tough to see, but this is Grover here. She was living down here-ish. She heads up Grover Avenue. She has to go all the way up here, down Superior, to the millinery shops, which are about here. It's not a super long walk, but it's a walk. She waves goodbye to her family, and she heads off down the dirt road. Now, she gets to the millinery shop, purchases her supplies. At 5:40 p.m., about an hour and a half later, she uses the grocery store phone to call her parents. She gets a hold of her mom, tells mom, I'm on my way, I've got the letter for dad, I got my supplies, I'll be home in 45 minutes. That was a routine call. She always called home when she was on her way. She always let her mom know that she was coming home. Hangs up the phone, walks out of the store, and that is the last time she is ever heard from, officially, again. Now, to understand Beatrice's trip downtown, I have to talk about Miller's Row. You guys said you're familiar with Alma. How many of you have ever heard of Miller's Row or Millerville? It's interesting. So Miller's Row was an area in town. I'm going to go back to that map here. Grover. It was about here. It was just a really small area, but it was essentially a red light district in Alma. I know what you're thinking. That's crazy. Little Alma, a red light district. I know. Now remember, at this point in time, industry in Alma is growing. There are people coming in way faster than Alma can house them. They have to live somewhere. So, little houses were built. Just 4 walls and a roof. Nothing fancy. No sanitation. You can see there's water all over the ground. It's dirty. There were boarding houses here. I'm putting that in quotes because they weren't necessarily boarding houses. These were essentially brothels. Gambling. People that you really don't want to meet around a dark corner. That's where they would hang out, in Millerville. Now, these photos are not of Millerville because all photos and any evidence of Millerville has been entirely erased. After this happened, Alma wanted this to go away so badly, they immediately tore down Millerville, erased any mention of it, and even today, the Historical Society can back me up on this, there's hardly any evidence of it existing at all. There are mentions in newspaper articles, and that's about it. These photos are of Millerville 2 that they put up a couple years later, again, to help with the housing. It would have been a similar situation. It would have been gross and dirty and unclean and just not a place you want to be. To get to downtown, Beatrice would have had to walk through Miller's Row. Now I want you to picture it. She's a young girl. She's dressed in her finest clothing. She's having to walk through this seedy area to get where she's going. She probably felt unsafe. But on the other hand, I think it's important to notice that maybe she liked the attention too. It was probably a great way to, show off the clothes. People are standing around. They're giving attention. She could have gone around. She didn't have to go through Millerville. But she did. Not blaming her. I'm just saying. It's important to kind of look at that angle. But anyway, she had to walk through Millersville, and she did. Oh, look at that. I did put it in. So it would have been right about there. And it would have been kind of on the other side of this. There would have been houses. Again, there's no photographic evidence, but it's about there. That night, Beatrice Hepler did not come home. Her mother waited up for her. Her father waited up for her. And at first, they thought, well, maybe she stopped and saw a movie. Now, she said she was going to be home in 45 minutes. Maybe she stopped and saw a movie. Maybe she saw a friend, and they went to hang out. Beatrice didn't have any friends. But these are the sorts of things you tell yourself when your daughter doesn't come home at night. Maybe she got stuck and they asked her to work. Maybe she was asked to babysit someone. But as the hours grew later and later and later, so did their anxiety. Sam eventually goes to bed. He puts their little grandson to bed, takes the other son to bed. But Effie waits up because she knows that Beatrice won't go upstairs to her bedroom if she's not awake and there to hold her hand. So she waits up. And she waits. And she waits. And then it gets to be about 1 in the morning. And she's still up waiting. Beatrice is nowhere to be found. So Effie's desperate. She goes outside and walks Grover Avenue up and down and up and down, calling for Beatrice. It's a clear night. She would have seen Beatrice if she was there, if she was walking. She didn't. And then Sam comes out. They're both walking, calling for Beatrice, Beatrice, Beatrice. And they do this all the way until the morning hours. Meanwhile, a farmer just down the road gets up, lets his cows out to the pasture. And as he's opening the gate, he sees a ruby red fabric. He thinks, is it an animal? Is it like some weird garbage? I'm going to go pick it up. Walks over to it. As he gets closer, he realizes what it is. It's Beatrice Hepler's body. Just as he realizes this, Sam comes walking down the road and sees his daughter's body. Keep in mind all of the tragedy that these people have already had happen to them and how heartbreaking that must have been for Effie and Sam. That's something that I can't even begin to comprehend how awful that would have been. Beatrice was 600 feet from her home, so pretty close. She was laying in an area of grass. Her neck was bruised. There were hairpins scattered around her, over 15 feet around her. One of her shoes was about 20 feet away. The other was on. Her clothing underneath was torn. Her underwear were torn. But her coat, interestingly, was perfectly buttoned up. Her hat was still perfectly pinned to her hair. Next to her were her little boxes of sewing supplies that she'd purchased, along with her father's letter. Now, the grass around her was completely still. There was no sign of a struggle. No branches broken, no grass torn up. She did have skin and debris underneath her fingernails, but that was it. That was all. Which led police to believe that she was not killed there. She'd been killed somewhere else and then dropped there. Now, it is 1917. In 1917, the police force and our investigations and all of that were not. We didn't have, forensics. We didn't have crime scene standards. We weren't blocking things off. So this crime scene had people coming from all over town to visit it. Any evidence that could have been used at that point in time was destroyed almost immediately. The police don't really have any leads. They spend the first couple days pulling in the usual suspects, people who hang out in Millerville. Pulled out one man named Sam Berry, who said, yeah, you know what, I did follow her some of the night. I saw her walking. I followed her around a little bit, but I left her alone. I didn't kill her. They didn't have any evidence, so they let him go. A couple other people said similar things. They let him go. They didn't have the evidence. And pretty quickly, it became clear that they didn't know what happened to Beatrice Hepler. And as time went on, it was getting less and less likely that they ever would. Enter, bless you, David Boudry. There he is. I know, it's hard to see. It's probably easier to see further back. This is the problem with using newspapers and not having, Anyway, Sam, Beatrice's father, is getting desperate. His daughter was murdered. The police have nothing. He wants answers. Bless you. She's allergic to David. So Sam goes down to Millerville. This man, David Boudry, had just moved into Millerville a few months before. He was living in the area. He knew it well. He was disgusted by the activity that existed there. He was an old lumberjack who was up in Canada. He had a wife and a kid. He had this really thick French-Canadian accent. And along with all of that, he also claimed to be an amateur sleuth. Sam said, I need somebody, anybody who's going to help me. So he knocks on David's door. David opens. He says, David, I need your help. Somebody killed my daughter. Nobody's doing anything about it. I need someone to look into this. David said, I don't know, man. I don't know how to help you. Then Sam said, David, you know there's a $2,000 reward for anybody who figures this out. David said, okay, I guess I can help. And David claims to then go on this wild manhunt to find the killer. Now again, I'm going to preface this. Everything I'm about to tell you right now is according to David. We have no actual proof that any of this happened. It might have, but the only person who can back this up is David Boudry. So keep that in mind as I'm telling you the story, okay? I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying. David learns that on the night Beatrice was killed, there was a little boy who was walking nearby her. He'd been seen nearby Beatrice, specifically as Beatrice was walking through Millerville. So he needs to find this little boy. He learns that the little boy's name is Louis Losey Jr., which is the cutest name I've ever heard in my life. And he would like to talk to Louis Losey Jr. Well, unfortunately, Louis Losey Jr. is no longer in Alma. His family moved almost like the day after this happened. So David needs to track down Louis Losey Jr. According to David, he travels all over the state of Michigan. He ends up in Cadillac. He ends up in Alpena. He ends up in Sheboygan. Finally, he finds Louis Losey Jr. in Canada. He goes to the Losey home, knocks on the door, asks Louis Losey Jr., "What did you see that night?" Louis says, "Yeah, I did see Beatrice. She was walking through Millerville. But you know who you should talk to is this lady named Anna Gilson." David says, "Okay, sure thing, dude." So he leaves Canada, comes all the way back down to Alma. And he knocks on the door of Anna Gilson. Anna Gilson is a 38-year-old woman. She's living in a boarding house in Holiday Park, which is a section of Alma that was essentially like built up for more housing again. She lived there with her husband Hiram and their 13-year-old daughter Gertrude. In October of 1917, David comes back to Alma, knocks on the door of Anna Gilson. Anna Gilson answers. He explains what he wants to meet Anna. He doesn't give all of his cards away right away. And Anna tells him, "My husband just died." David says, mentally, perfect. In his mind, he says, a woman who is grieving her husband needs someone to lean on. She needs a friend. She needs support. And if I become that friend, if this woman knows something, eventually she'll tell me. So I'm going to play the long game. David begins supporting Anna financially, emotionally. He's buying her groceries. He's paying for Hiram's funeral. He's providing coal to heat the house. He's visiting her parents with her. And this goes on for several months. But by December, according to David, he's getting frustrated. He wants Anna to spill, and she hasn't said anything. So he decides he's going to play his final card. He's going to confront Anna, say, "I know everything. You either tell me or I'll tell the police." And according to David, it worked. Anna said, "You're right. Something did happen, and I know everything." She immediately implicates 3 people: a man named Albert Eichhorn, a man named John Brennan, and a woman named Inez Johnson. She tells David Boudry this. She gives a signed statement to police the next day. And then, in an interesting choice, decides to meet with the Eplers and tell them exactly what happened. I'm going to tell you the story that Anna told David, allegedly. Keep in mind, this is all according to Anna. I have no way of fact-checking that this actually happened. But this is the story that Anna told. She claims that on September 4th, 1917, 4 people showed up at her house: Inez Johnson, Albert Eichhorn, John Brennan, and Beatrice Epler. They arrive in a car. They park the car out back. They all walk in. They're all drunk out of their minds. They're loud. They're rowdy. They're passing around a bottle of apricot brandy. And Anna's husband, who's still alive at this point, gets annoyed. He's going around the house yelling that he's going to throw them all out. Anna claims that it's at this point that John Brennan makes advances towards 16-year-old Beatrice Epler. John Brennan is about 30 years old at this point. Beatrice declines. Albert, who's in his 50s, says, "If you won't go with him, I'll take you myself." Beatrice screams, according to Anna. At that point, both men grab her. Albert grabs her by the neck. John takes her by the arms, and they carry her into the adjoining bedroom. They close the curtain. They're in there for about 5 minutes. Beatrice screams twice, and then they emerge. Albert's hand is still around Beatrice's neck. John Brennan's hands are still around her arms. But Beatrice is almost entirely unconscious. She can't support her own weight. They're literally having to carry her. They carry her outside to the car, put her in the back seat. It's said, Anna says, that Beatrice screamed again. Albert Eichhorn gets into the back seat with Beatrice. John Brennan gets behind the wheel. Inez Johnson follows out the door with Beatrice's coat and hat. And as she's running out the door, she whispers to Anna Gilson, who's standing there. She says, "Don't tell Anna." They get in the car. They speed away. Albert Eichhorn allegedly returns to Anna's house the next morning. He claims, and I quote, "The body has been left where her folks will find it." He comes back later to tell Anna that they did indeed find the body. And that's it. Now, the police are thrilled. For months, they've had this murderer roaming the streets. They needed something, some way to solve it, put it to bed, clear all of that up, because it looks real bad for Alma. So when she made this statement, the police, the press, everybody jumped aboard. Yep, this is it. We're going to try these 3 people. They're murderers. We got to get them out of here. And they did. They decided to try all 3 of them separately. Albert Eichhorn was the first one to be tried. His trial started on April 29th, 1918, and he was tried for first-degree murder in Gratiot County. Albert Eichhorn was in his 50s. He was married to a woman named Anna Sullivan, not Anna Gilson, different Anna. They had one son together who had died decades earlier after being kicked by a horse. He'd had a really interesting early life. He worked as a boxer, bare hand boxer, which was illegal at the time. He was tied to a lot of illegal gambling circles. He was convicted of larceny in 1899. He had spent 4 years in the State House of Correction in Ionia. He'd been released in 1903. He worked as a farmer, built up his wealth, did super well for himself, but he used that money on womanizing, gambling, illegal drugs and alcohol. And all of this time, his wife is sticking by his side, which, good for her, I guess. And at that point, he meets Inez Johnson, who was also implicated in this. They begin an affair. Essentially, according to the newspapers at the time, the worst kept secret in Gratiot County. They're both married at the time when this is happening, but they're together always. His trial begins. The jury selection was really extensive. They called 178 men because women were not allowed to serve on juries at the time. And obviously 12 were selected. There was 10 farmers, 1 painter, and 1 sawmill owner on the jury. The trial began with a lot of testimonies. David Boudry testified. He told the story that I explained to you about going and finding Louis Locy. Anna Gilson testified. She tells the story that I told you about the 4 of them coming to the house. Gertrude, 13-year-old daughter, she claims to have heard Beatrice in the house. She knew them by voice. A woman named Eva Sanderson testifies. Here's Treva. She's 16 years old. She lived on Miller's Row. She claimed that on September 1st, 3 days before Beatrice's death, she was approached by Inez, Albert Eichhorn, and a man who identified himself as Jack Kelly. They tried to convince her to go for a ride in their car, and she refused, ran home. She was scared. Several women claimed that Albert Eichhorn was with them the night of the murder, which, yikes. He was married. His wife claimed that he was with her on the night of the murder. And then a man named Merle Cooper testified. Merle was a day laborer. He'd been hired by Anna Gilson to dig a basement in her house. He claimed that one day when he was down there digging, he heard David Boudry and Anna Gilson upstairs. He claimed that Boudry was pressing Anna to confess everything she knew. But Merle said, Anna said that she didn't know what he was talking about. Boudry pressed and pressed and pressed, then said that if she testified, he would split the $2,000 reward with her. Now, this created a little bit of doubt, but it wasn't enough. On May 20th, 1918, Albert Eichhorn was sentenced to life in prison at Marquette Branch Prison, guilty of first-degree murder. The courthouse was so packed, the trial was so sensationalized at the time, everyone was talking about it. Albert Eichhorn goes off to jail, and the next trial begins. Now we have John Brennan. Now, this photo, I believe is John Brennan. Listen, I had to dig so hard for a photo of him. There's hardly anything. But I'm 99.9% sure that that is John Brennan later in life. Just a, clarification. Anyway, they had to move the trial to another county because there was so much speculation and talk about this trial that they couldn't have it in Gratiot County. Finally, they moved it to St. John's. John was 34 years old. He was married with children, and he was based in Flint. John was a troop leader for a theater troupe that would travel around the state of Michigan. They would put on shows and plays, put up the tents, put on the show for the weekend, tear it all down, move to the next town, do it all again. The troupe was called Kelly and Brennan's Big Tent Theater. He co-founded it with a man named Jack Kelly. Ooh, does that sound familiar? Oh my goodness. And he claimed to have met Albert Eichhorn through business, and he says that's how they knew each other. There are several things that come out during this trial. The testimony is the same. David Boudry, Anna Gilson, Gertrude, they all testify, tell the same stories. Travis Anderson comes back on the stand, reminds the court and the jury that she had met Inez, Albert Eichhorn, and a man named Jack Kelly that night, and they asked her to go for a ride, told her that if she knew what was good for her, she'd go. They asked her, is Jack Kelly in this room right now? She says, yeah. And guess who she points to? John Brennan. A man named Benjamin Kelch also testifies. Benjamin was staying at the Alma Hotel. He claimed that he came in one night and a man was standing there in the lobby drinking. He walked up to him to introduce himself. The man introduced himself as Jack Kelly. They're drinking, they're talking. Jack Kelly says to this man, guess what? I've got a date with a 16-year-old girl tonight. Do you want to come with me? And Benjamin Kelch says, no thanks. Albert Eichhorn comes in, picks up the very drunk Jack Kelly, and they speed off. Court says, is Jack Kelly in this room? Benjamin Kelch says, yeah, he sure is. Who does he point to? John Brennan. Defense argued that John wasn't able to do this crime because he was at the show all night. He completely denied knowing Beatrice at all. The jury deliberated for 2 hours, and then they came back. And on December 27th, 1918, John Brennan was found not guilty. He left the courtroom smiling, carrying his children, and essentially was never heard from again. Inez Johnson, it's her turn. On April 4th, 1919, it's been almost 2 years, her trial was moved to Isabella County. She was in her early 30s. She'd lived a lot of life for being in her early 30s. She'd been a former school teacher, a stenographer, a hotel cook. She'd been married in 1902, abandoned in 1914, lived with her 2 kids, Benjamin, who was 12, and Margaret, who was 7. She was now a boarding house owner. Okay. And she called Albert Eichhorn her second husband. Yes, he was married. But again, worst kept secret in Gratiot County. She claimed that she couldn't even afford a lawyer. She was so, bad off. She didn't have any money. But then she arrives to her trial dressed to the nines. She's in furs. She's got jewels on. Her entire family is there with her. It was a spectacle. Everybody testifies. Same folks. David, Anna, Gertrude, Treva testifies again. The same sort of stuff. And then a letter is introduced. This letter is signed by Inez Johnson and addressed to Albert Eichhorn. I'm going to read you the letter word for word. This is what they read to the court. It says, "Well, Al, I'm out to my father's. Pa and Uncle Pete went my bail. Now I have lied and kept still and did everything to keep you out of it, but they are after you strong. Smith, the prosecuting attorney, is trying to ring you in awfully hard. There isn't any use of denying absolutely your being there, for there are too many that know. So I'm trying to tell you what I did, and that is all. Inez." She claimed she didn't know anything about that letter. She claimed that she was in bed by 9 that night. She at first said that she didn't know Beatrice, but then later said she did. Said that Beatrice had come by and invited her to a movie, and that she declined. Also said that Beatrice told her, quote, "I'm a married woman too. My husband is a tire salesman." The jury deliberated. They were 4 hours. Inez was convicted guilty. She was sentenced to a life of hard labor at the Detroit House of Correction. She insisted that she was innocent. I'm going quick. I know. Give me a minute. I'm going to skip this, but if you want to know more, I'll tell you about it later. In 1929, many years have gone by. A man named Elmer Hammond comes along. He's obsessed with learning about unsolved crimes, specifically those that include fingerprints as evidence. He finds that the fingerprints on Beatrice Hepler's neck did not match Albert Eichhorn's fingerprints. He also discovers that the $2,000 reward was never paid. He tracks down Anna Gilson. He finds her in Wisconsin. She'd remarried. She was living there. And asks her about it. Anna, who had been telling this story, trial after trial, year after year, says, "I lied. David Boudry threatened my life, said that if I didn't testify the way he wanted me to testify, he would kill me. Said he'd split the $2,000 reward with me, never did. I had to lie. There was no party at my home. I don't know what happened to Beatrice Hepler, but it sure didn't happen at my house." I'm going quick, so I'm giving you the synopsis. Hammond then tracks down David Boudry. David Boudry had disappeared. He was no longer in Alma. He wasn't even in the state of Michigan. It took him months and months and months to track this man down. Finally, he found him. He was living in New York, living in state housing, and he was essentially on his deathbed. Hammond asked him, "What do you know? Tell me, Anna said this." He, of course, denied everything Anna said, stuck to his story, and he died in the next couple months. Eichhorn's sentence was commuted in 1933, and in 1934 he was released after 17 years in prison due to good behavior and the fact that so many people were doubting his guilt. Same with Inez Johnson. Effie Epler remained convinced that Albert Eichhorn killed her daughter until her death in 1962. Five minutes, then I'm done, I promise. But this is important. When I was researching this, that's essentially where the story stops. And any and all modern day retellings of this story, that's where it ends. But in my research, because I tend to dive as deep as I possibly can, and I'm insane, there are a couple things that I found that are interesting, and I want to share them with you. Louis Losey Jr., who was the little boy that David Boudreaux tracked down all the way to Canada, said that he saw Beatrice Epler that night, told him the name Anna Gilson. Turns out, Louis is David Boudreaux's nephew. Now, none of that was revealed during the trial. Nobody mentioned that at all. Their relationship was so close that David Boudreaux listed Ella Archie, who was their aunt, as his contact on his U.S. immigration form. It wasn't a long, distant relation. It was family, and they were close. Jack Kelly, who co-owned the theater troupe with John Brennan, the name that John Brennan tended to use when he was introducing himself to other people, I can find little to no trace of that man. Did he exist? Maybe. But I'll be honest, I'm pretty good at what I do. And there's about nothing when it comes to Jack Kelly. Interestingly, David Boudreaux, his wife Sarah, she'd been married before David. She got married really young, in 1877. Guess what her husband's name was? Jack Kelly. Kelly married Sarah, who was pretty well off, took her money, took everything, abandoned her within a month, left, dropped off the face of the planet. She was left with nothing. Decades later, David Boudreaux hears the name Jack Kelly. Did he think that it was the same Jack Kelly? Was this his way of getting revenge for his wife? Another interesting thing is David Boudreaux has been, from multiple sources, allegedly interested in Inez Johnson romantically. Did she reject him? And that's why these three people were the ones on trial? The woman who rejected him, her guy, and Jack Kelly? Maybe. I'm skipping that. At the end of all of this, this is a crazy, wild goose chase of a case. But in the end, I think what really sticks with me is that if there's one thing that I can take, is that the greatest threat to justice, especially in a case like this, is not always crime. It's the manipulation of truth. People having that much power to be able to twist things the way that they want and the outcome that they are looking for. And that's that. You can read the rest of my stories in Bloodstained, which I have for sale. And wait, what? Allie, I want to hear more of your voice talking about things like this. You can. I have a podcast called Allie in the Archives where I talk about weird Michigan true crime and weird Michigan history, the Black Legion, Benton Harbor's House of David, just weird stories that I am excited to share. Thank you guys so much for bearing with me through all of that. I appreciate
you. Okay, we have 2 minutes. So is there a question? Does anybody have one?